on the next generation of DeFi builders.
Great. Hello. Hello.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
How does it sound? Great. Okay. Thank you for inviting me, UCSB, to be here. This is awesome. What a beautiful campus. What a beautiful day. It has been so amazing to listen to all the presentations before me. I think it's, many have, centered a bit on Uniswap. So some things in the presentation have already been covered in some ways. So we'll see some, repeated messaging, which is great. And I'll also get to talk about how at the foundation, well, one, what the foundation is. I'll talk a little bit about Uniswap, maybe give some additional context on Uniswap's evolution over time, which Danning actually touched on a little bit, and I'll go to in a bit more detail from a different lens, which is great. And then I'll talk about how the foundation thinks about builders and developers and how they're important for DeFi's growth, Uniswap's growth, and how some of our builders are actually taking some of the research done by folks like Walsh and CMAC and Danning and putting them into action on chain, which is great. I am Devin. I founded the Uniswap Foundation 3 years ago. I've worked at a bunch of different places. I'll just call out, I worked at BlackRock for 5 years, and that's the place where I saw how antiquated a lot of our existing financial infrastructure was, which inspired me to get into crypto and into DeFi in the first place. I will talk a little bit about the Uniswap Foundation. So the Uniswap Foundation exists as one of a few different entities and organizations focused on Uniswap, the Uniswap protocol. There is Uniswap Labs, which is the organization founded by Hayden Adams, who invented the Uniswap protocol. They build a lot of core financial infrastructure. They built Uniswap X. They build the Uniswap interface. So if you've traded on the interface, that's something that was built by Uniswap Labs. There's the Uniswap DAO, which holds a treasury of Uni tokens and governs the protocol in a few different ways. And the Uniswap Foundation is an organization that is funded by the treasury, that's funded by governance, and which focuses on building the ecosystem and community around the protocol. So our mission is to build the world's infrastructure for digital value transfer, and we do that through grants. We do that through a few different kinds of grants, and you'll see here that the kinds of grants that we focus on are not just building protocol, supporting infrastructure. So you'll see protocol and then security. These are kind of like, audits to make sure that the protocol is secure and safe for transacting the trillions of dollars worth of value, which it has over the years. We're also focused on research. So funding research by some of the preeminent DeFi researchers and thinkers in the space, as well as developers and governance. Developers who take some of the ideas which are thought through at some of our research conferences and putting them into action, actually implementing them on chain to improve execution quality and to innovate upon different ways in which you can use AMMs. And we also support the governance process. Helping the community work together to make positive change. Some numbers from a kind of Uniswap Foundation perspective. Over the last year, we've committed almost around $20 million worth of grants to hundreds of grantees, and one of the areas where we are extremely focused, now that Uniswap v4 has launched, and we've heard the word Uniswap hooks a few times across presentations. That's a new primitive that's been introduced in Uniswap v4. I'll talk a little bit more about that. It essentially has taken Uniswap, which previously was an AMM, like a swapping protocol, but which has like a set of static design decisions which were made and you kind of have to deal with as an integrator. And it's opened up to be more of a platform. So it allows a developer to go in and introduce, so CMAC talked about a few kind of like MEV mitigation techniques. You can, introduce a new kind of like Oracle, way of like Oracle, an Oracle that looks at price on the AMM that can be leveraged by other DeFi protocols to ensure like the safety of those protocols. You can introduce kind of many new ideas to the AMM, which wasn't previously possible. And we've helped a lot of developers learn how to do that, and many of them have gone on to actually take action on chain and deploy hooks. And this is after v4 was launched, a short matter of months ago. I think we just hit around our 3-month mark since it's been since v4 was launched. So very happy to see our builders actually building in the real world. So we'll talk a little bit about Uniswap and its evolution over time. We've talked about Uniswap a bit today. It is the world's largest decentralized exchange protocol. And it is special because it has a few distinct qualities that distinguish it from centralized exchanges, so like a Binance or a Coinbase, for instance. It is immutable, so if you build on top of the protocol, you know that the rules of the protocol, how assets are priced, how transactions happen, will not change on you. You know you can trust it. It is credibly neutral. You know that there is no middleman or market maker, or there's no, the person on the other side of your trade. You know exactly how your trade will be executed as you interact with the protocol. It is permissionless, so anyone can use it, anyone can provide liquidity, anyone can create a liquidity pool for any digital tokens. And recently, the DEX surpassed 3 trillion in total trading volume since inception, which is quite a milestone. And Uniswap has many different versions, which I'll go through. So this is dialing a bit more further into the evolution of Uniswap over time, very quickly. Uniswap v1, very basic. You can think of it as like the prototype version of Uniswap, and it allowed for a very specific kind of token pair between ETH and an ERC20. V2 came in 2020. Basically, the key innovation here was ERC20 pairs. Ironically and funnily enough, that isn't really used too much, and you'll see in V4, it's kind of reintroducing back native ETH ERC20 pairs into V4. But that was the big thing that was introduced in V2. V3 introduced concentrated liquidity. So it basically allows your capital to be used more efficiently and effectively. If you're providing liquidity for 2 stable coins, your capital isn't spread across 0 to infinite price. So you can kind of focus your capital's use around that $1 mark. And V4, as I mentioned, introduced hooks. So at the heart of V4 are hooks. So you can think of these as like modular plugins or almost like a customizable like API layer that allows any developer to go in and create, introduce any arbitrary logic upon beginning or an end of a swap, beginning or an end of creating a liquidity pool, beginning or an end of providing liquidity, so on and so forth. And as I said before, Uniswap was kind of a static protocol that allowed you to swap with it, allowed you to provide liquidity, allowed you to create liquidity pools. And there were a set of distinct design decisions that were made by the team who built V3. One of the questions that led to the creation of V4 was why do the users of V3 and people who are building upon V3 have to accept these design decisions as their own? There are so many different kinds of things that you can do. We've heard from the talks today all the different ways that you can mitigate MEV. There are a number of different things that you can introduce to AMMs in order to onboard more institutional capital, real world assets, things like that. Unique kind of quirks of markets for specific kinds of asset pairs, which are made infinitely easier to build and to deploy if you don't have to rebuild an AMM from scratch, which is what you would have had to do without this creation of hooks, which allows you to take advantage of the fact that core swap logic is embedded within V4, and you can go in and just add your own customizable code to do the specific thing that you want to introduce to the rest of the DEX without having to rebuild it. And so you can do infinitely many things with hooks. And just to give you a feel for some of the options, I took a list of ideas that was published by the Uniswap Foundation, a list of kinds of hooks that we want to fund over the next year or two given our grants budget. And I think abstracting a little bit away of the specifics, because there's a lot of words around here, I want to give a feel for the kind of holistic and robust financial system that is possible to build upon V4, or that we're excited to support in building upon V4 with some of the grants that we are dispersing. So many of these create a better LP experience, and better user experience. So some of them are focused on mitigation and redistribution of MEV. Some of them allow us to onboard new kinds of assets, real-world assets. So many real-world assets, when they're deployed on chain, there are U.S. compliance rules around who can trade them, who can own them when, and embedding them into the AMM is something that's tricky to do without this idea of a hook. So something like a permissioned pool It allows for, the arbitrary introduction of like geofencing, of like AML, KYC, like whitelisting, blacklisting, that type of logic is made so much easier by a permissioned pool hook. Let me see if I can call out any others. Okay, and another kind I'll call out, so auto rebalancing and rehypothecation hooks. So these are hooks that basically improve the return of liquidity providers. Basically hooks that, use some like custom logic to rebalance or introduce like dynamic fees, things like that to basically improve the LP's return, which can attract more capital and ultimately improve the experience of swappers. So this is just a beginning list. You saw there were more than 700 hooks deployed just over 3 months. There are many different kinds of things that you could do. Could be very cool to check out. And as I get further through the presentation, there's a website called HookRank that you could check out that actually lists all of the hooks which are live today if you want to get a better feel for that. So now that we've talked about Uniswap Foundation, Uniswap, UniV4, hooks, I'll talk a little bit about the foundation and builders, why we care about builders, what are the things that DeFi builders need, and what are some of the programs that the foundation has created in order to support our builders. So if you look at an AMM and you think about, how does an AMM get better, improve over time, strengthen, you can think of very simply of like a flywheel between swapping activity and liquidity provided. The more swapping there is on the protocol, the more LPs want to LP to earn the fees. The more the more liquidity provided, the more the better execution quality is. Very very simple idea, very simple framework. On top of that, you can think of, now that we have V4, I think developers, like the introduction of developers here is a way to, bring in more swappers, either by improving execution quality, by, creating conditions under which a given kind of user, so for instance, like institutional capital, institutional users, they need to meet certain compliance conditions. If we build out a very strong, like robust network of permissioned hooks, hooks that allow for real-world assets to trade, that can bring in more institutional capital, which then like benefits LPs who can provide liquidity in those assets. And so developers are kind of like a layer integrated into that flywheel that can strengthen Uniswap's core metrics on the whole, increasing TVL, increasing execution quality, and organic swapping activity on top of it. So our goal, with all the programs I'll go through is to make Uniswap the best place for DeFi developers to build. We've talked to a lot of DeFi developers over the past few years. We recently did a survey of, I think, at least a few dozen builders who are early on in their journey of building hooks, potentially taking some research and looking to actually bring it on chain. Developers who are building DeFi protocols and are thinking about integrating a hook to improve their end user experience. Some of the things they called out are, they need funding to pay more developers, to pay for audits. They need security expertise. They need audits to make sure that they don't lose their users' money once they deploy on chain. They need introductions, they need marketing. These are like the core needs that we're looking to solve for. And this is actually even itself has evolved over the last few months, but this is like a life cycle that we put together to share with our community a few months ago. That looks at, along the top, you kind of have the developer journey from ideation. Like they have to think of their idea first of like what they're going to build. From there, they need to build it, they need to test it. And then once they've tested and deployed, they need to work on attracting actual users and growing their user base of swapper or LPs. So we've developed a number of programs across each of those steps in the developer journey, from education, particularly earlier in the journey. We have the Uniswap Hook Incubator. So this is this is on the next slide. So this is basically a program which has served in the hundreds of experienced Solidity developers globally have gone through this program. It is a 2 to 3 month virtual program that has a pretty high conversion rate. I think, 55% retention rate, which is, I think, more than double comparable programs in the space. Truly global, and we've seen many teams graduate from the Uniswap Hook Incubator and go to like deploying on chain. I think like Clanker on Base is like a pretty like highly used asset issuance hook on Base, which we were really happy to see. It took off like the first week of V4 going live, which was really exciting to see. But that's a program where if you're an experienced Solidity developer, you don't know anything about DeFi, you can go through this program. In 2 months, you can go from knowing nothing to deploying your first hook on chain. Funding and subsidies. So people need funding to allow them to take time off their jobs, to allow them to hire people, to allow them to pay for audits. So we think about that all through the journey, from hackathons to paying for the development of a certain few kinds of hooks, subsidizing audits. So here in the funding and subsidies test axis, you see Uniswap Foundation Security Fund. This is another program that we launched about like 6-ish months ago or so, and you can see Beta actually wrote the post here. But so this is a $1 to $2 million because we've re-upped since we wrote this post. That goes towards across not just 15 teams. It's like several dozen now, and will be like up to 100 over the next year or two. Subsidizing the first round of audits for teams, which are very early in their journey, because we don't just care about people building, we want to make sure that Uniswap maintains its reputation for safety and security for everyone who uses the protocol. So this is definitely a top priority for us to ensure that the hooks which are deployed, we help our developers as much as possible, and ensuring that any bugs are resolved before they go live. And going back here, so funding and subsidies, getting to the growth side, we hear about getting distribution. So once a hook is deployed, making sure they get in contact with and aggregators, distributors, solvers, all of the ways that a trade can be routed. So you remember Danning's very complex web of like different kinds of sources and areas that like trades or swaps can come from. A hook needs to get connected to all of those routes to like maximize its order flow. So we're exploring a few programs to help with that. So like subsidy, we're doing a hook subsidy program as like one incentive, manner of incentive to basically reward solvers or I guess like repay gas costs to solvers that choose to route to V4 hooks. That's a first experiment where we're launching in a few weeks, I think. Tooling, so these are things like a hook library, basically like making it even easier to build hooks, and marketing, so helping with some of our like marketing distribution channels, allowing folks to just find some of these hooks more organically. And so I talked through a few examples of these programs: the Hook Incubator, the Security Fund, Hook Discoverability. So I mentioned HookRank a few slides ago. You could go to hookrank.io. This is like kind of like maybe the first version of an app store type idea for hooks. This gives you baseline information about like many of the hooks which have been launched into the ether if you want to learn more about them. That's a lot of the information I have to present today. If you want to learn more about us, you can follow us on Twitter. You can talk to me today. You can talk to Beta. You can go to our website. And if you are a developer, we have a few of the programs that we have to support developers, again with education, funding, audits, etc. So definitely feel free to reach out, check some of these programs out on our website. Thank you again for having me.
All right, we have like, I think we have time for a question.
Oh, sorry, I forgot questions.
Just one.
Okay.
Yep. So a glaring omission from this impressive list is Unichain.
Yes, Unichain. Great question. Okay, so I mostly talked about Uniswap v4, but another recent launch from the Uniswap ecosystem has been an L2 called Unichain. So Unichain is a DeFi-focused chain. I guess I think about like how do we make it DeFi focused? We make it DeFi focused through technological contributions. So Danning's team, the Flashbots team, is building like a module that basically allows for like faster, like trusted transactions for any users who are trading on Uniswap. It's basically a form of MEV protection. There will also be a Uniswap Unichain validator network launching shortly to allow for like improved trust assumptions for trading on Unichain. And we are in the midst of, I think mentioned in the Royco presentation, of you know, bringing in basically a lot of DeFi TVL to help like attract builders and help make it that much easier for builders of hooks and DeFi protocols to launch on Unichain. So you can go to unichain.org. You can learn more about Unichain. We are very excited about it as a place to build for DeFi builders.
Thanks so much, Devin.